Hey
There we
Tim,
are.
great to see you again. Uh,
Likewise.
I'm excited as always about a chance to explore together.
Yeah, me too.
So we were just talking about the labels that we use to both describe and reject features of our humanity, and how ironic this becomes. I remember I saw a meme on Facebook yesterday that was discussing how the idea of masculinity was socially constructed. And I just thought like, okay, are there features of identity or characteristics that aren't do we have any labels that aren't socially constructed? Because, apparently if it's socially constructed, we should reject that. And I was like, well, we would have to reject everything. I mean, just,
Yeah. Every bit of language for a start.
right, because it's all socially, like tree is socially constructed,
Yeah.
so if that's the problem, if that's like the demon in our headlights, we're in bad trouble because there are no non-demons. If you use those headlights, demons appear everywhere.
I think it's a symptom of the times, isn't it? That everything is basically in a kind of liquid state and flowing and, and breaking and reforming, and nothing that anyone thought was true is true, or well, not nothing, but you know what I mean? It's like everything, all the different rules and guidelines and foundations that we built everything on, it all just seems to be liquid. So I don't know, it's quite interesting. It feels, I always felt like we'd been slowly atomizing into our constituent parts socially, and maybe internally, maybe in our personalities as well to some degree, I don't know, but it just feels like we've got so far in this process of atomization that we're now in this kind of fluid state where strange combinations can just come back together. Or I know it's a challenging time, but it's a very interesting one as well, for me personally anyway.
There's
Yeah.
so many features of what you're sharing there that are important and that I want to explore. So a couple that come to mind immediately is the are two things, particularly what I call war mind, which is where something stirs the humans up, much like in Hymenoptera, if you are near a wasp nest and you swat one of them, right? They mark you, they release pheromones, and the whole nest just goes war mind, right? And now
Yeah.
it's just like, destroy at any cost, right? We'll die, we don't, it doesn't matter, just go nuts, right? And then the other is this sort of, okay, here in the United States, I can't speak for other countries. We are ground zero we are the petri dish for informational psyops.
Hmm.
And one of the primary motivations of those psyops is simply to factionate us further. Because to whatever degree we can be factionated, you don't have to fight us. We'll fight ourselves for you, right? Um, but there's lots of other weird experiments going on that aren't quite so obvious. Um, and sort of co-extant with this war mind thing is something we in the United States are trained to, each generation uniquely. And I suspect in the UK and other, sort of Western, what we think of as Western nations, it's similar. But we grew up watching shows on TV like Perry Mason, right? He's a courtroom lawyer. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I've
And
got
so
a vague recollection.
and so we were inculcated with courtroom consciousness. We were trained to script and think about possible courtroom scenarios. And one of the features that's become prevalent in the fascinating and terrifying American a sort of clinical analysis of linguistic features, particularly identity labels, is this courtroom mind. So there's a mode of virtue signaling where you call out some word or clade or cohort as, these are the bad colonial, patriarchal, gender specific people. Um, and there are good and bad features of this, but it's pretty it's really weird because they'll call people out for virtue signaling while they're virtue signaling, right? Like I'm virtue signaling by calling out virtue signalers. And so there's this sort of recursive, weird tornado-like thing going on related to what you're talking about with the atomization. Like once the atomization happens, what are the ways that it starts to form little dust devils in social and linguistic cognition? So these are some of the things that occur to me, and I think they're look, I'm a troubleshooter, so I'm going to see the problem, right? And I'm going to see the danger, and I may not be paying a lot of attention to any of the positive features because I figure like, well, those will take care of themselves. They don't need me, you know. I'm just here to fix stuff.
Yeah, no, I hear you. I've got a similar problem.
Oh, you say
Noticing,
more.
yeah, well, noticing always, it seems like I'm completely wired to be always looking for the problems so I can fix them.
Yeah, there's nothing
It's,
masculine about that. That's not a part of our gender or anything.
oh no, definitely not. Yeah, well, exactly. It's just that kind of, and it uses that very kind of left brain
Yeah,
you know, dart attention. It's like, look, what can I do? How can I change? What can I change? What can I adjust to make this work better? Whatever it is, whether it's a mechanical thing, a relationship, something happening in nature, rain coming in through the roof, whatever it is, there's, and also even to the extent where I'm preempting. I think a lot of the way I live is preempting problems and making sure they never occur. And there's a kind of art to that where you're spinning the plates and you just once you get them all spinning, then you're just maintaining it so that, you know, something doesn't go wrong. But yeah, I think it's a strategy I've used for a long time, but it occasionally fails massively because the world just isn't like that. So it's very humbling as well to be shown that your one way of dealing with the world doesn't always work. Um, in fact, I think that's where I've got to lately is sort of opening up to perhaps different ways of taking on the world. Other than that one, I've been pretty good at that other one and done quite well out of it, but it doesn't cover all situations and all eventualities. Yeah.
yeah. I still am a professional technical troubleshooter. So I work with Apple systems and was particularly working with publishers and designers and architects and stuff. And eventually, it became obvious that I had a sort of preternatural um, sixth sense, to use the old language. So that, and also the other weird thing about people who repair mechanical things. We all know the story of you bring your car to the mechanic, right? And he starts it up, and the problem isn't there, right? And you take it home, there it is again, right? So I would occasionally have something like that, right? I would show up, and the problem would just disappear. It's like, oh, the shepherd's here. All the sheep go right into place. They just recognize the presence of the shepherd. And it sounds weird because we wouldn't think that machines are like that, but computers are really weird machines. Um, and then the other thing was I would just come and I would see the person's face and I would immediately know exactly where the complex, like I would see like somehow an integration of over the history of the situation. I'd just be like, oh, it's this. Like, but you haven't even looked at the machine. I'm like, yeah, it's this. And a lot of the time it was, right?
Mm.
But that leads you to a sort of false confidence
Mm.
because now you think I would think like, well, no, I'm the guru, right? I've got this. And so occasionally that misfoots us, right? We get on the wrong foot there right off from the first move, having become familiar with this sort of well lubricated ease. Um, and then much worse. And I know that I'm going to get in trouble for this because it's gender stereotyping. But when women come to me with a problem, they don't want me to fix it a lot of the time, right? So if I go into troubleshooter, uh, costume, right, I'm defecting from the relationship, and that's going to bring wrath. The woman might not even be conscious of it, right? But she's not there to have me fix things. She wants something in different, unique in each situation. But she wants things like to be seen in a deep way, space to put all of her things on the table herself, right? Someone to observe her doing this and listen and participate with her emotionally, right? And so if I go into, let me get my toolbox, I got it right in the truck, right? Right. Then she's going to often experience that as just pure defection, whether she's conscious of it or not. And it's not going to go well for me in the near term future, right? Or for
Mm.
us, right? Um, and of course, these gender stereotypes are wildly incomplete and they're not written in stone, and some of them are socially constructed. Doesn't necessarily mean we should just flush them down the toilet.
Well, exactly. Sometimes they're even true. How about that?
It's very
You
British
know,
to say.
not but not all the time for every case, but
Right.
sometimes they are.
Yeah.
That's why they exist, right?
Yeah, I mean, there's this mediation. Okay, so part of the problem is there's a mediating critical feature of human cognition. I'm just going to adjust my cam just a little bit here so that it might be possible for me to get my hands in the picture a bit more. See how that works up a little bit. One sec, sorry.
That's all right. Take off my jacket.
Yeah, that's a little better. All right, so there's such rich terrain to explore here. Um, try this one more time. So I'm just going to sort of circle a few features of our human interiority that we are not inclined to think of a lot. The first is that there's a complex interior array of membranes between public and private, right? And so you have like absolutely private. There's things in there I won't even just talk with myself about. And then you have like super close. I'll talk with myself about these. And then a little closer, I'll talk about these with the very closest people in my life. And then, um, friend group and social group and out toward the public. And one of the features of that construct is an array of observer constructs. And this is where you get courtroom mind, um, a critical uh, judge, right? It's looking at things going like, yeah, that thing there, blah, 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 blah. And you get also a sort of strange array of projections of what possible people might think if they heard me say this or saw it. And so when we look at features like woke culture, what you see are the establishment of a new feature in there, a new critical overseer, right? It's like, you can't say homeless, you have to say unhoused people, right? And by the way, that feature is not human. It's a social linguistic construct. right? It's not there to see justice done or anything like that. It absorbs the possibility of social transformation as a critical voice. And by doing so, largely eliminates the inaction of that in relationships by acting as a judge. So there's very complex features of that. And we probably won't go deep on this, but the other thing that is involved is this fundamental construct, a triangle inside human consciousness, where you have vigilance up here, ambiguity down here, and prediction over here. So anything that increases ambiguity amplifies vigilance, which feeds into a critical judge satellite, right? Because what you're trying to do is reduce ambiguity. So negative ambiguity is extremely burdensome to human cognition. If there's an unknown and we can't really get a grip on it, right? And we think that it probably has negative connotations for the future, like we're going to make some predictions about it. It just amplifies vigilance, which actually doesn't affect ambiguity and drives prediction into weird places. What you spoke of earlier about the plate spinning, right, involves this because once you get the plate spinning and you sort of trust the basic structure of that, now you can reduce your vigilance down to, I just need to make sure that things don't happen where a plate will fall, right? And this reduction in the necessity of vigilance is part of why we live in cities and boxes.
Hmm.
They reduce the novelty of nature, which reduces ambiguity, which makes predictions easier. Like there's nothing's going to change in here while we're talking. I don't have to pay any attention to that stuff, right? There's no animals, no plants. It's just dead stuff back there. Um, so these things fascinate me because they drive the features of human social behavior in a variety of largely pathological ways.
Yeah,
And
I was going to say, is it so what's driving this? Because it's a kind of death, right? It's like we're terrified of life, so we're creating this dead world to live in that's safe. That's what the safety thing is, right? It's
yeah, yeah,
death.
yeah.
It's, I mean, ultimately, it's this, and that's all bureaucracies, all control. It's the opposite of creativity. It's the opposite of eros. It's like, ugh. And that's how it feels. And yet, that's why I wonder, is it fear? Because it's this fear of the chaos of life and the richness and the mess of it that makes us want to control it and box it and make it understandable and predictable.
Beautiful. Yeah, so I have a few thoughts about that. The first thing is once you get interested in prediction and you think like, the more my predictions are good, the better things go, which isn't necessarily true at all. Um, what, and when I say you, I just mean humans, right?
Sure.
What you won't discover is that the more you kill everything around you, the better your predictions become. There's nothing easier than to predict what will happen in dead terrain. So you just keep killing the terrain down. So you're evicting novelty and relation and intimacy and eros, right? You're just evicting those things. You're probably not conscious of this. And the more you do that, the better your predictions become, which makes you think, I'm a great my predictions are so powerful. I'm a magician, right? Um, so if prediction becomes your goal, novelty reduction amplifies the appearance of the facility of that. And this relates to this triangle, right, of vigilance, ambiguity, and prediction. Um, so yeah, that's one part. Dead terrain enhances your prediction. Oh, okay. So here's the other thing that just blew my mind when I realized this the other day. And of course, in various branches of psychology or even therapy, this concept is there, but I think we rarely understand it. I was thinking about my friend Josephine Larson, who is a brilliant elder acting teacher in the UK. And I was talking with a young friend about some problems in our lives. And I suddenly had this array of insights, which I'll try to encapsulate very quickly. Um, so in certain branches of therapeutic methods, we have the concept, for example, of the drama triangle, right? Victim, persecutor, rescuer. You can put those wherever you want. And humans circulate around this triangle so that they take on different roles under different circumstances. And it occurred to me that suddenly, out of nowhere, two astonish the worst things that were astonishing to me and still are. We know how familiar roles work. Since we know how they work, that reduces ambiguity. Now we can make predictions, not necessarily consciously, right? Subconsciously. That if we just inhabit one of these roles, we've been doing this our whole life in every
Mm.
transaction with every human, even here today, like this is going on in the background, right? We know how it works when I play victim. I know how it works when I play persecutor. I know how it works when I play rescuer. And by the way, I'm really into that role. Just hi everybody. That's my favorite. I love playing rescuer, right? That's why I'm a troubleshooter. Um, what we don't know is what being human looks like, because
Mm.
that involves improvisation, mutual sensing, intimacy. You can't predict the outcomes of that. So you're not sure which rewards you will and won't get, when you might or not get them. You're not even sure how to do the accounting if you're seeking rewards or punishment or both. So it's really easy to know how familiar roles work, so we tend to just take those on, you know? And then what occurred to me, which I thought was even more surprising, is that in acting, of course, you have a degree of improvisation. What you do there is something really bizarre. You take a structured role and improvisatorily invest it with life,
Mm.
right? So the actors are actually kind of showing us the answer. They're giving us the key to the cage, but it's in the cage, right? They take the cage and they make the cage the key. And this is fascinating to me.
So when somebody does something that's unusual and really inspiring, do we respond to that so strongly because it's outside of those roles? And that's why we sort of create celebrity and put people really high, because they're escaping from the triangle in some way
Mhm.
and they're showing it to us, and we all feel some sort of deep response to the authenticity of that and the freedom of that, perhaps, without maybe understanding the cost of that as well. But still, it touches something deep. And as you were speaking about these structures that we inhabit, that we've kind of inherited, or we're sort of raised to in our culture, it made me think, is this all just a trauma response of having left the tribe, of having no longer, we're no longer belonging to a place? And I feel like instinctively that the belonging to a place and to a people where you were completely held in a way where you could relax enough that you didn't need to be anyone. You didn't need to have a personality, because you could just be whoever you were that day, because everybody around you was part of you and you were part of the land. I just feel like when, as you're talking, that's what I'm thinking, well, maybe that's it. It's just a kind of, it's a panic response collectively over hundreds of years, culturally, because, oh shit, we cut the cord, we cut the connection. And perhaps that's why it's manifested in this way.
This is so exciting. I get so happy when we're able to have conversations like this, partly because it's rare and partly because it helps me remember in both senses of the word, like all kinds of things that are not a part of my common moment-to-moment experience. So this brings up other features that are crucially important, and one of them is the bizarre and terrifying myth of the individual. You're a separate person. You gotta take care of yourself. You should be responsible for your own healing, bruh. You know, this kind of stuff, like just nutso, insane garbage. Okay. Um, and then also there's a background topic here, which I'm just gonna bookmark with the word uplink. So remember the triangle, right? Vigilance, ambiguity, prediction. Well, in a community, right, where these people are all connected and they have uplink, right? Then what happens is the vigilance and expertise burdens get shared, which brings the vigilance way, the personal vigilance way down and communalizes it. So it optimizes for communal multi-sensing,
Mm.
right? I don't have to play all the roles by myself.
Yeah.
Which, by the way, if you got to play all the roles by yourself, you're going to be obsessive compulsive. Okay. You're going to be, I want everything perfect in the right spot, which isn't bad, but we have to see it as a response to the loss of this entire history of communal multisensing. Okay. And that's a terrifying burden for an individual human to take on. Children have to take this on. They can see
Mhm.
that parents are checked out and there's no communal like multi-sensing. So the child just takes on the whole sphere and tries to encompass and even become the adult in the situation to the degree that they can, which is traumatic. Nobody can
Mhm.
do that. Like you can't succeed. Um, and yet we do somehow. There are branches of success that rise from that miasma, that crisis, right? So there are those things, and then there's also related to the performers. What you have is there's many useful and beautiful ways to think about all the things we're talking about. I'm not trying to say one of these perspectives is correct or the best one or anything, but there is this thing that we could call, uh, in a particular way, one's genius, right? By which I don't necessarily mean one's really smart personal intelligence. I mean an array of features of what we could think of as our soul that are drawn into human incarnation, and then from within that trap, express themselves floridly, right? The 9-year-old girl who's an expert ballerina, right? The musician who's blind but can, you know, draw in thousands of people to tears in a moment. The actor who just completely disappears into the impossibility of this role. The mother, the single mother raising, you know, 3 children by herself somewhere with no money and you know, just moment to moment on the cliff's edge, and yet brilliantly, or father, right? Brilliantly mothering the children while at total sacrifice of all of her dreams. Um, all of these amazing expressions of of the genius of origin in the seeming trap of physical incarnation. Um, you know, Arthur Young, in his book The Reflexive Universe, proposes that features of reality give up certain modes of liberty as they descend into material existence, sort of a V shape, right? And then as they rise back up, right, from plant, so we go from like light to atoms to molecules to plants to animals to humans in his model, right? So as they rise up the other side of that, they invent new forms of liberty, having given up these other forms. And so there's a natural expression of the lost forms in the human expression of prodigy and love and improvisation and play and anamnesis, unforgetting together, which is part of what I like to think perhaps we are doing here.
Mm, that's interesting. That yeah, that feeling of creating new forms of liberty. I mean, I suppose that's what great art is. That's what, pure culture as it comes, and it comes out of the ground. I mean, it comes out of the ground through people and then out. And maybe it also comes in, from the stars, from the sun on that journey. But it does feel like, because the the downside of this kind of atomized individual culture is evident, but there is an upside to individuality, and there is a kind of, I don't know whether it's just a compensation and feeling like you belong completely to a place, and a people would just make it completely feel like nothing. I don't know, because I've never done that. I wasn't lucky enough to experience that. Um, but there are moments in the individual journey which are blissful for me, and usually it is in relation to nature. Um, But I wonder, is it just that I'm accessing that feeling that was more readily available when I was, when we were a part of a place and a people, and I'm just getting little glimpses. Maybe that's why it seems so sweet. Because I do, when I have those moments in nature, I do long for that with people, but I've had so few experiences of that with people. I have had some. I've had experiences of complete oneness through and with other people. Um, Even beyond people, it wasn't really about people anymore in those moments. It was much more like being part of the whole. But it did happen with people, but it's been quite rare for me.
Hmm, I hear you.
And perhaps also because people skills are not my strong point either. So, perhaps people who are better at people and being with others have more of that feeling more often. That would be interesting to explore with someone who I do, who I might consider more sort of socially gifted, say.
It's funny because I'm kind of similar, although I'm an anthrophile. I love humans. I can't stand what the species is doing. Like at the group level, we're almost completely captured by bullshit, like lethal, malignant pathology. But I don't confuse the group level with the individual persons. And I think humans are astonishing. They're miraculous. They're the Earth's most profound investment has been in us, and that's probably not accidental.
Mm.
Um, but it's similar for me. Like most of my I've had experiences, like you say, with others in nature, and you bring up something that I just wanted to touch on again. The communality and the extension of um, the necessities of vigilance, watching ambiguity, and making predictions, and how when that's shared, it both works way better, right? And the thing that I left out though was that humans in a living place who are communal in a living place, the living place actually becomes a sensor array for those humans, an extended array of sensors. So that further intelligently reduces the necessities of vigilance and ambiguity, because they're not just shared among the people, they're shared in the communal identity of people and place, and even the sky, right? So it's like people, the place, the sky. Um, so the loss of that, it's not surprising that the humans are really interested in going out into space, which I think one of the most fascinating ideas in my childhood. I think it's one of the dumbest ideas in my adulthood. Um, it's a really bad idea. But it's not surprising that they want to go into space because they're already in spaceships, right? Like the promise of the 70s, we will give you, a technological utopia, no more disease, no more war. We'll take you to outer space, 2001 A Space Odyssey. If you remember the inside of the ship of in 2001 A Space Odyssey, what you had was clinically dead terrain. There's nothing in there, nothing alive, right? It's like a giant laboratory inside, it's a lab womb, right? It's
Yeah, test
totally dead.
tube.
Say again?
Test tube.
Yeah, yeah. And so what happened was we didn't eliminate war or poverty or disease. But we didn't go to space either. But what we did do is we brought the concept of the spaceship into our lives as our homes, right? So now we live in a spaceship on the surface of the planet. It's not surprising that they're trying to kill everything. Right, the humans captured by these processes, right, want dead terrain, and they want it clinically dead. And there's another feature of this, which is, when we were talking about these little satellite intelligences that get established around us, as relation, intimacy, living places, relationship with the living beings and nature and the plants and the animals and the insects, relation with the sky. As those are evacuated, what you get are these little satellite intelligences up here that, akin to how IFS works, right? Parts work. These parts get really weirdly hypertrophy. They get inflated, and they want to suck up all the energy and just stay dominant, even though they're very ineffective. And in some way, the more ineffective they are, the more they inflate and just want to suck up everything. And so there are features of left hemisphere like function that despise the existence of anything intelligent. We don't want any intelligence that threatens my dominance. They despise the existence of anything alive. All that living stuff has to go away. In fact, if these features had their freedom to do what they quote want or what they are motivated to do, they would literally like shut down the left side of the body. They'd be like, that's not me. Get rid of that thing. That is not me. That's some ghost thing that takes over when I fall asleep. Cut that off, throw it away, grind it up, make a tool out of it, right? So they despise the existence of intelligence, organisms, novelty, improvisation, intimacy, all of these things, because those are the threats to what they seek, which is absolute sovereignty over all phenomena. And the best way to have that is if everything's dead, including themselves, right? At the final push, if it comes down to there will be living things or I will die, they'll pick I will die, right? They want all that stuff gone. And those are features of what has captured our species at the species level. And the species is not aware of this. They're just kind of following along because we got away with it so far, right? Um, and it's unfortunate because nature's more delicate than the moderns imagine. It's not an infinite bank you can just keep drawing from. And at a certain point, you will sell the organs of that being to such a degree that you won't be able to have any organs anymore. And I think we probably have passed that point about 30 years ago. And so it's like we're in a train that's going so fast and it's gone off a cliff edge, but it's going so fast that it's not quite falling yet, right? And so I think this is where our species is at the moment, right? It's like that cartoon where Bugs Bunny puts Elmer Fudd through a tube and he runs out the log into free space, and then Bugs goes, "Hey, Elmer," and kind of turns around and is like, "What?"
Yeah. Roadrunner as
Yeah,
well.
exactly. The
Off
guy,
the cliff and then
right. So we're sort of still in the moment where it looks like we're suspended, but I don't think we are.
yeah, although I guess I'm more because I associate more with life in its widest context. I just feel like it's a human tragedy going on, that life itself is actually fine and, just keeps on rolling.
I
It
wish I
does
could
keep on rolling.
I wish I could be on your side about that. I'd feel greatly relieved if I thought that way. I can entertain that perspective, obviously. The problem is, when Toymaker was with me, it had a primary array of concerns. And those concerns involve pivots on living planets that if those pivots collapse, you can forget about complex life on that planet. It's over. And it showed me thousands of different worlds on which these pivots, like they didn't last. Right? And it also showed me that our world, while not the only world like ours, is quite unique. It's unique because it's had a long, and this is actually coming to the point that we sort of pre-planned here. We had a long enough safe period where we weren't just getting pounded by stuff from outer space regularly, that we were able to establish things like these. And these are rare, right? These really complex features of organisms require vast time of stable safety in the environment to establish and sustain. And this is another one of those features. And ironically, this is the feature most likely to end that situation on this world. Right?
Well, and that with
Yeah,
it, yeah,
yeah,
all of
agreed.
it.
I mean,
Yeah.
yeah, it's true. Like these two things fundamentally have to kind of go together. It's hard to understand what it would be like for a creature that had this, but not this.
Mm, yeah.
So yeah, I'm scared. I There's another thing that the humans don't understand. Okay, so if we take the woman, if we take the female body and we transfer some of those features onto the planet so that we think of the planet as a mother, right? Then what you'll realize is just like any mother, she has a life arc. Yeah. And her life arc is fundamentally dependent on the life arc of the sun, right? Which also has a life arc, even though it's very long. Right? And so what Toymaker showed me was that these two life arcs are intimately linked, and the humans are dumb. This isn't a reflection on you. The humans are dumb because they don't think about this. They don't realize that this thing has an arc, and within that, the planet has a much smaller arc where it can produce complex life. They just think, she's been through disasters before. She's going to be fine. Blow it up. Oh, who cares about all those animals and stuff? They'll just grow back. Not true, right? There's a life arc in which complex life is likely or possible or, protectable. And just like a human mother, there's a phase of her life where she's barren from now on, right? She's not making babies anymore. And nobody's thinking about this. They're just thinking about the resilience of organisms. Oh, these things are so resilient. They can handle anything. They'll just rebuild it. Yeah, well, not necessarily, right? The Earth is maybe 4 billion years old or something. That's a lot of billions. That stuff doesn't just go on forever. And the sun is similar. There's a span in the solar life cycle where a planet in our position around this star can produce and sustain complex life. So there are timelines associated with these things, and the humans don't think this way because they've never seen another living planet. They don't know what the history of living planets looks like. Nobody studies this.
But even with that, I mean, if you expand the timelines out even further, everything has a lifespan. and whatever your concerns may be, ultimately, your local area is going to come to an end. So, it's one of those things. It's like your own death. It's coming. So, it's just there. But so it's all kind of relative, isn't it? It's all relational to whatever perspective you want to inhabit for whatever time, or
That's true.
you know what I mean? So,
I
I could
do.
I could outdo your,
You
your
think we can keep jousting because I'm in love with this lady. This planet is like a
well,
little
no, me
girl,
too. Me
and
too.
I'm, nobody's going to tell me like, well, everything comes to an end. So no, fuck that. No way. I'm not having that. No chance of it. The humans are idiots and they're attacking something they don't have the slightest idea who she is or what she's up to. And similarly,
Yeah, but I don't think everybody, I mean, collectively it looks that way, but I'm not like that. And I
no, no,
don't
I,
think
I know that. I know
so.
that.
So I think, and also there are lots of people, and there are people even now who are living in completely different ways who are not that. And I
Agreed.
feel like, yeah, I just feel like there's more going on than certainly I understand. And I think my feeling of it being okay and life going on is a much deeper feeling that comes from it's an intuition from the deeper intelligence of life. And I think in some ways, I can go backwards and forwards on the whole going to Mars thing. On one hand, it's ridiculous because look at the fucking mess we made and look at the mess we make everywhere we go. But yet, on the other hand, it's actually trying to create some kind of plan B. If we do fuck it up, at least we'll have the seeds in a jar. But that seems ridiculous. But I love I love the scope of that vision. And I think that's wonderful. Even if I'm conflicted because I feel like, well, let's sort out our psychology, our way of being. Let's become wise before we start trying to kind of, inseminate the universe with ourselves. But of course, it's not us humans, it's life. And life is all the viruses and bacteria and all the things we don't even know about yet are tied into that. And they're involved in this kind of going out. So we could even go out into space as humans, thinking it's us saving humanity. And then we all die, but something of life is continued in some other way. So, anyway. Hall of Mirrors could go on forever. Yeah.
So, I mean, what I said was very severe, and I'll probably go back and erase the hyperbolic nonsense thing that I said there. But
No, don't. I don't think you should do any editing in these conversations.
oh,
I think
okay. Well, I'm
let
just
it go.
concerned about getting banned from YouTube.
Oh, fucking hell. Well,
Because
that's
one of
going to
my
happen at some
I
point.
made some noises about something I don't even want to mention, and they took the video out. Right? They're just like, yeah, we're removing this. But
Well, there's something we need to talk about is how to get around this because it's actually self-censorship is really crippling people now.
mhm.
That's outrageous. It's everything that this medium is not about, even though, I
Yeah.
mean, we are in the middle of a war, aren't we, for
Well, the thing
control.
is, the purveyor is owned. So if the purveyor is owned, it's the same thing, right? Like, yeah, we just want control and money. But I want to say a few things about living planets and space. So,
Hmm.
um, Toymaker said he didn't say this was a fact, but he showed me something very important about humans, which is that our biology is linked to the specific distance from the sun at which our planet is, and that it's also linked to being on the planet and receiving that sunlight. So we don't usually think this way. We think like we can make lights. We got all kinds of lights. But what he said was if you go just a little ways out into space, your bodies will not work. Your minds will not work. You are not a space traveling species. You will not be traveling to other planets. You guys are confused about this. And again, he showed me other worlds, right? And how over time things developed so that it was possible for certain life forms to go out into space, and that planets like ours are a bit like flowers, right? They produce this sort of pollen,
Mm.
and that there are beings in space-time that actually circulate the pollens between the worlds in the same way bees do. Like, so there's a syllogism actually, which is as bees are to flowers and honey, X is to living worlds and Y. Solve for X and Y, right? So there are beings that make something resembling honey from the biorelational hyperstructures of living worlds, and they transmit assets between those living planets. And the implication was that our minds are the children of those beings,
Mm.
which is very science fiction-y. Also, the humans have done something really stupid, which is we invest all of our evolutionary momentum into building machines. That's a deadly dumb idea. That evolutionary momentum should be invested into building intelligent communal relationships and behaviors and possibilities. That's where it needs to go. And eventually it'll have to go there, right? So it's possible that all this destruction and weirdness and devastation is leading to, a vector change, which is, when people say like, oh, the humans are about to become enlightened, it's the new millennium, they're going to all wake up and blah, which I'm like, yeah, no, that's not going to happen. But there is some kind of a vector change, right, in play. And the question is, for me anyway, the question is something like, will the anciently conserved ecologies survive it? Because those things, we can't be without them.
Mm.
you know we and those things are like we are the hand of the entirety of the biorelational hyperstructure of our world, its history and future. So when we start selling the organs out of that body, this thing shrivels up right quick and we won't know it. I mean, this is another thing I want to at least touch briefly on, because it's recently I've become aware of this. I wish individuals and groups could understand something much better, and this is particularly relative to the concept of artificial intelligence. If something is introduced into your cognition or something is subtracted from it that fundamentally affects your capacity to measure things, to tell differences, you will not know what fucking hit you.
Mm.
Not know. Right? You will wake up one day and be a completely different thing, missing faculties and having other bizarre satellites that don't fucking work, and you will not know. Because anything that affects what you see with, you can't see it. You won't remember how it was to be different, and you won't know you've changed. And this is what is about to take place in 50 ways per minute in the future of humans, for a broad array of reasons, but specifically because of what we call artificial intelligence. That is going to fuck up everything that we have ever used to measure differences. We won't know the differences anymore. So that's something I'm very, as a troubleshooter and a rescuer guy, right? Like cognitive paramedic or whatever, I'm really concerned about that. It also will mess up time, because time isn't just a linear thing going tick, 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 tick. It's a relational, um, it's a relational thing, it's an intelligence thing, it's a cognition thing. It has all these features that are very complex. It's orchestral, it's not one line going do 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 do. It can fold back on itself, it can send shock waves backwards, it can send shock waves forwards, those things can interfere. It's a being. It's an array of intelligences. It's not a thing in my view and experience. So those are some of the concerns that I have and am exploring because I'm partly just because I'm fascinated, right? I'm like a watchmaker. I'm looking at all these little features and trying to understand how they fit together and watching what happens when desynchronization occurs, right? Which seems to be the sort of zeitgeist of the moment.
Yeah, it feels like it began like most things probably in a very quiet way and we didn't notice it. And the AI thing brings it into focus. But in some ways, the whole social media thing was already doing that same process, you know, starting the process off, I feel. Because if you look, I mean, look at it. Look at how society in your country and mine have completely changed in the last decade. Like completely. People no longer relate in the same way they used to and
That's
did.
exactly what I'm saying, right? Something was introduced that affects how we measure things, and we couldn't tell that we're not measuring. Like, what the hell? We don't even know. We, I mean, imagine somebody who you drug them, you take out their brain, and you just put a new brain in them, and then wake them up. They don't know. It's like that. It's like
Mm,
that, right? You
mhm.
can't. There are things you can do to human consciousness and the relational intelligences that are natural to us. There are little sort of switches you can turn on and off, so to speak, even though it's not mechanical. It's a bad analogy. Features you can turn on and off, where they'll have no idea what hit them, and they'll just wake up different and not know that they're different. And you can steal anything, anything. If you can do that, you can rip off the whole damn, like all banks are yours. It's like that meme from the 80s, all your base are belong to us. Um, so yeah, these are things that are dangerous. I think we can educate each other about these things and we can, there's no way to fix what's happening. This isn't going to be a repair operation. The opportunity here is to establish something so compellingly beautiful, intelligent, and human that it just steals the momentum, right? So that's not a war or revolution model. That's a fertilization model.
Yeah, something better. And you know, practicing things as I've started to do now, just noticing that all social life is being mediated by this technology. So I want to start not doing that more, like
Mhm.
actually meeting people in the world, sitting by the fire, talking, connecting in that way. You know, those things, I think small habits like that, I spend more and more time just outside, not on a screen, because that feels so good to do and is the opposite of this thing. And yet there it is. And because I have children, it's all over them. It's just, you know, like I said, I messaged you the other day, it's the Pied Piper. It's just come and it's playing the song and all the kids are like dancing away, skipping away. We're never going to see them again. So, yeah, it's fascinating. I mean, the AI thing, it's so huge, this thing, that it does just look like apocalypse to me. And yet,
I mean,
there is a part of me, let me just add this little bit in, because this is what fascinates me. Because it's all mechanical and it doesn't speak to consciousness and it doesn't speak to soul, whatever that is. But I feel like, you know, if my consolation, if there is one with this AI thing, is if consciousness is actually the substrate of reality and everything has some form of consciousness in it, and different material things coming together create more complex um, material conscious kind of complex forms and shapes, then maybe consciousness will be in this thing somehow in a way that I can't conceive of because I only have this one small physical unit and this one pinprick of light of consciousness. But then if consciousness is just one thing and it is this, underlying ground of reality, then of course it's fine. So that's my consolation there. But, the physical, human, monkey, emotional thing that I am doesn't see, I mean, short of having wisdom somehow flowering through humanity, and we can kind of utilize these tools in a clever way before they annihilate us. Yeah, I just don't see anything good for the monkeys in it.
Okay, so I just want to push back against one thing you said briefly, which is that you're just a little pinprick of personal consciousness, because that's nothing like what you are. It can seem that way. We can be in the sort of, this part of the finger, the hand of the body, right? Yes, we can do that. It feels that way sometimes. But your mind isn't local to you. Again, this is a feature of uplink, which perhaps we'll get into. So there's a bunch of features of the AI thing that are trippy. My son was saying the other day, he's a monk at an ashram in Southern Cal here, studying Advaita Vedanta. And he was saying, over and over throughout history, God has sent little messiahs, right? Like incarnations to Earth, yeah. And it doesn't tend to go well for those beings. The humans get really weirded out and crucify them and stuff and burn them up, whatever. Um, but so what if AI is actually just the humans are trying to invent God? What could go wrong? But what if it actually just becomes like a substrate that's complex enough that God can incarnate into it, right? We might accidentally succeed at like ironically succeed at the opposite of what we're trying to do, which is I love my son's mind. He's really like the next generation of my mind, and it's kind of terrifying. So that's one option, but look, I'm working on an essay called Organisms Are a Platform for the Embodiment of Non-Corporeal Intelligences, right? So you get a really complex platform, uplink. Now you have the sort of complex amalgam of, like human, animal, organism, being, transcendental intelligence, origin, this sort of multiple layers of little bubbles all in each, living creature looking out into material existence, and then symbiotically protecting and nurturing and complexifying the basis of the platform, which is the sun and the earth and the moon, primarily locally here, right? And specifically the earth, right? And this goes back to something I was just mentioning earlier, which I won't go on about, but the sun is doing something. It's not just up there being an explosion in space, right? It's doing something the same way a brain does something. It's transceiving impossible features of real existence that we don't have even categories for, let alone words. And the earth is more than merely a being. She is something that produces beings as a side effect of the transcendental things she is up to. So all of these things, the humans are completely ignorant of them at the group level. I am not ignorant of them. I've experienced them. I know them as real. I can't explain them, but I've had direct experience of these matters. And also, the humans seem to think like, well, we're alone around here. Whatever we do, that's going to be just the law. Well, those days are over with. The earth has friends. The sun has friends. The sun is not the friend of the humans. It won't abide if they start tearing the planet down. It's not going to just like sit up there glowing nicely in the background. And there are other intelligences that are deeply intimate with this world that if you piss them off, they could snuff you with a fart. Like they will not sit around and just go like, "Oh yeah, let the humans burn all that shit down." This world has relationships in time space that are beyond anything we can conceive of and crucially important to myriads of beings throughout time and space, not just local to the Earth, right? So there's some hope. What I'm trying to say here is there's some hope of various kinds of intervention. And unfortunately, there are also forces in the sort of non-corporeal intelligences that are like, oh, the humans are going to burn all that down. Well, let's just go ahead and take all that stuff, right? Since, we would respect, they might respect the Earth and the humans if things were going okay. But if the humans are going to push the red button, they're just going to be like, oh, okay, free for all, take everything you want, right? There are um, there are commodity seeking intelligences in the mix of transcendental intelligences, right? And the sort of altruistic but benevolent ones, we might imagine, normally keep mostly a leash on these things, but under bad circumstances, that can get messed up. So it really is a complex, future for the humans with all these features that we're not really capable of thinking of, except maybe in the kind of tedious and trivial way we think of angels and demons or something, right? Not, I mean, the demons kind of got a bad name because the angels and the demons probably the same thing. I mean, it's very confusing. The derivations we've made and those that were made for us, many of them were weaponized to terrify people into following cults. So
Mm.
they're not trustworthy, right? Those pictures.
Yeah. Or blamed, blamed for the bad things we do, or kind of, or blamed for the good things we do. Yeah.
Right. Although
Uh,
the picture of like the angel and the demon, right? It's almost hemispheric. Right? It
mm,
really is pretty hemispheric, right? So there is, it does refer to something, but not necessarily up there or out there. Although again, that you don't get instances in organisms of features that aren't derived from the character of the everything, right? You can only get derivations. You can't just suddenly make some new thing. That never ever happens, right? The earth is sort of like a glass of water, and then over time the water evaporates and you see some crystals in the bottom of the glass and you take them out and you're like, oh, salt crystals. The water was salty. Well, around here, the way that works with the earth is the water in time space is eyesy, it's earsy, it's mouthy, it's heartsy, it's
mm.
handsy, it's wingsy, right? It's toothy, right? It has all these features. So it also has hemispheric lateralization-y, right? Even flies are lateralized.
Oh, really?
Oh yeah, if a fly turns, if it's curious about you, it'll look at you with its left eye. And if it's
Hmm.
frightened, it'll look at you with its right eye, right? Just like birds. I've observed this. I don't think many people have spoken about it, but I've observed this behavior in flies. So like if they're sort of happy and giddy and things are good, they'll look at you with their left eye. Or, I guess they don't have like it's a really complex thing they have there. But yeah, even insects are lateralized. We are bilaterally symmetrical mostly on Earth. And the exceptions like octopuses and stuff are super fascinating. Jelly,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
sea anemones, and they're like round. Mm. But yeah, the lateralization thing is serious around here. I mean, it obviously is a feature of the context. You can't get things that aren't features of the context. So, shall we explore the hand thing a bit?
Yeah. Let's do it.
How are you doing on time?
I'm good. Yeah.
Okay, great. So, to give a little background, in 2002 in May, suddenly one night something showed up in my mind and just started teaching me impossible things, and that experience went on for 9 months. I think of it differently. In the beginning, it seemed like my own genius had suddenly awoken, and then it seemed like I was talking with an alien, and then it seemed like I was talking with a colloquium of aliens, and then it seemed like, no, it's a whole civilization of alien civilization speaking through one being. And then it seemed like an angel, and it just kind of went on like this. And that all sounds pretty loopy. That's okay. I'm not trying to convince anyone of anything. But one of the most staggering things it taught me was a different way of counting. And it explained that the humans, most of us, we count wrong. And as you know, in English, we have this phrase, oh, that doesn't count, which means like, oh, you can safely ignore that. Um, there's a feature of our cognition that determines what's important according to a series of principles that we are not conscious of. And if we could change those principles, we could change the form of our intelligence. And so it taught me a series of toys based around the structure of the human hand. And these toys are one of the most profound things I've ever encountered because they caused me to be capable of seeing features of existence that were previously invisible to me. So if I may, I'll just run through the basics of the toy for a few minutes. Uh, so normally, if I hold this up and say, how many is this? Most of the humans, and occasionally someone comes out with a much better answer, but most of the humans will say 5. Because we were taught to count on this in the West. And by the way, there are indigenous cultures that count more like the way I was taught to count. But around here, we just count this as 5, which means that we conceive of these members as separate things, right? And we don't count features of this that are crucially important to count. So we'll call this count 5 the human count. In this metaphor, this is just a metaphor, animals would count this differently. They know that you have to count the most important thing first, otherwise you'll forget which things are important. So they would count the place where the members come together first, 1 for this, the palm. And then they might count 1 for the thinking member, 1 for each of the working members. So this would be 6. An angel has an expansion of the same principle. It would notice that the hand has 2 sides, right? And on this side, you may notice that there are obvious little lines and distinguishing marks. Whereas on this side, what you have is mostly a unity with some wrinkles and some features at the tips, right? These fingernails. I'm being reminded of something. It's ephemeral to my intelligence. Oh, I lost it. Perhaps it'll come back. Animal concepts are the first. Just thinking. Yeah, I can't find it. It's almost like I was getting a transmission, but I couldn't hold it in consciousness long enough. Um, Separate parts, holes. So the angel would count 1 for the whole thing first. It would count the whole. And then it would turn this over. Oh yeah, 2 sides. Right, unity and distinction, right? They're not separate. They only come together. Unity and distinction, they only come together. Oh, that's what it was. Okay. So the thing is, every single form in nature is just like this. If you want the secrets of origin, intelligence, transcendental awareness, mathematics, all these things, look in the forms of living beings. It just turns out that for humans, this thing is everything, right? This is the one part, you see this part of your body more than any other part of you. Every time you act, you look at your hands. You're overlooking this thing all the time without being aware of how transcendentally astonishing it is that these exist and that we have them. This is the source of everything we act on the world. Okay, I would argue that our sight touches things. It's actually like something's coming out of our eyes and coming back into us, so we touch things that way. Our mouths touch and with speech and sound, right? But it's only with this thing that we can really finely manipulate situations and circumstances in the way we were talking about earlier, where you like spin some dishes and you then keep those things rolling. You have a tough time doing that without this. When you write, you see your hand. When you eat, you see your hand. If you touch someone, you see your hand. When you reach out to embrace someone, your hands, right? Your hands, your hands, your hands, they're always in front of you and they're always overlooked. Right? We just take them for granted. Of course, those of us who've suffered injuries or don't have hands,
Mm.
or have deformed hands, or uniquely formed hands, to be more politically correct about it, uh, they don't take them for granted, right? So what I'm getting at is we were given not just a book, but the entire library of secrets. It's not just in your hand, it is your hand. Its structure, its relationship to consciousness, to intelligence, to thought, to creativity, to music, to caressing, to preparing food, to eating, to feeding one another, right? To gathering, to discarding, all these things, right? They all happen here. And so the structure of this is the living book of the secrets. All of them are written here. We
Mm.
have just forgotten how to read them, right? And we overlook it because it's so mundane to us. Yeah. That's what it was. Okay, God. All right, so the angel would count differently. It would count one for the whole first. You don't want to forget that it's a unity. And then one for the unifying body or palm, one for the thinking member or thumb, one for each of the working members or fingers. But actually, the angel would make a weirder move first. And, some critical people will be like, why don't you start at the body? Why are you starting at the extension and going backwards, right? But I'll get to that. It's very useful to do it this way. And you can do it the other way. Um, But what the angel would count first is something, and I'm actually getting choked up right now about this. The angel would count this first. This is what leads upscale to all other beings in all of time. This is what leads to the body. So it would count plus 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, plus 7. The uplink first. Without that, what do you got? And this is the thing that the humans absolutely forget. And this is the thing that our governments represent, our corporations represent, our religions represent. It's this thing. And they represent it by destroying it. They get rid of it. They cut it out, they evict it, and in the space that's left, they put something dead, right? The corporation, the government, the military, right, goes here. And what should go here is absolutely sacred. And this thing wakes up, no matter how weird our situation, this thing wakes up when we fall asleep and we dream. It's the uplink. And fascinatingly, on the other side of this, not entirely obvious, like this isn't a real separation, but the uplink becomes invisible to us as we age from childhood. In childhood, we're intimately connected with this. And as we age, our awareness of it degrades and is replaced with representations, language, enculturation, all these things. We undergo the great amnesic loss of origin and intelligence. Um, but the astonishing thing is that across this thing, if you were to just see like a hand sticking up out of the ground, there's one thing you would never imagine by seeing this. And that is that across the wrist, you have these. You have this. this stuff, right? This thing, right? This. You would never guess that across this thing, there are senses so shockingly astonishing that they would be impossible to imagine, and abilities, right? So across this, there's a broad array of impossible features from the perspective of this, impossible at this scale, right? And really, you have like a heart, right? You have all kinds of things, lungs and a liver and a pancreas, kidneys, um, gallbladder, genitalia. I mean, all these astonishing things, right, across this wrist. And it just turns out that some people will say this is a fractal relationship, but I think the humans are confused about fractals because they're not like they are in math. In nature, this concept of fractals is very, very different. When you go from this scale to this scale, it's a catastrophic expansion and transformation of the paradigm. And that's why you have like eyes. You don't have eyes in your hands, although the eye in the palm is a very
Mm.
important symbol because it recognizes the unifying body, right? You see with the unity, not with the fingertips. And the problem with us humans is that instead of counting this like the angel or like the animal, we're doing something even weirder. We're doing something really crazy. We're counting this like that. We just see this thing, right? And we think these things are separate beings. But even if you just go like this, it's obvious that's impossible. Impossible. It cannot be that way, right? And the way that we think and count is like this. It's hard to me to get the camera to do it just right, but you can see what I mean. So across the wrist, you have these impossible features, and there's a third scale. I'll elucidate the second scale first. So first, my body is one, but like my hand, it has two sides, right? The back of me is really weird compared to the front of me, and I never see the back of me. That's one thing I never see, ever. I guess someone could take a picture of it, show it to me. So we have these two sides, and just like our hand, um, we are first there's a wrist, just like the angel count, that plus. First there's a plus. Then there's one unifying body. Then there's one thinking member, actually has two segments, dude, just like this thing. Then there's four working members, each with three segments. And on the body, these segments end in, well, they end in stars, right? They end in star shapes. And the star shape of the foot is collapsed for its purpose, right? It's redimensionalized for its purpose, but it's a star shape, just like this thing is. And so the body, its structure is reiterated here and uniquely dimensionalized for function. But the important thing in this model is the wrist. And if you'll notice, my wrist does not connect to the thinking member. It connects to the unifying body. Right? That's where the wrist is here. That's where the connection is. This thing is second after the wrist. And obviously over here, the distinction is minimal, right? This looks more like one thing than this does. Um, so the fascinating thing about the second wrist is just like this wrist, across that thing, our senses, I promise you, in your wildest imaginings, you would never guess they exist. The capacity to know the entire history of any organism you see, the capacity to read from the intelligences in all of time space, the capacity to teleport, to bilocate, to resurrect dead people, to heal with a glance or a touch. These are things that are natural to our form of being that are lost to us because our uplink has been crushed and represented. And this thing is the primary representation of that thing. The internet came first. This is the evolution of that. this replaces that.
Mhm.
Um, every form in nature and every being, including the earth and the sun and humans, they have a very special feature that was pointed out to me, which I call the tail, but it's actually where they were severed from the unity. And on our bodies, that place is the umbilicus. That's where the second wrist is fundamentally connected. Although in humans, it's even weirder because those things that we refer to as the chakras, those are features of the wrist. Those are uplink. It's like a hand into the spirit, and the fingertips are the chakras, right? And that leads upscale to the what I would call the third body. And the senses and faculties that are there are, and they are infinite, and they are not single things like telepathy or, healing, or they are they are multi-ordinal features that have different ways of being focused into something that we could make a single name for. And the reason that the second wrist isn't physical is complex, but it can be stated very simply. If it were, it would have more mass than the universe, each one of us. It cannot be, it must not be physical.
Well, and it would be more dimensions than in the physical, right?
By far, yes. And so this is the fingerprint of the transcendental coming into matter. And so one of the things I would ask people to do is, first of all, count different. Count the uplink first. Count the unifying body. Count the differences in the members. Understand the two sides. Count the uplink first. Every being, the uplink is the crucial feature of the being, right? Who are their people? When I see a raccoon, all of the raccoons are there, all right, as this one. A man or a woman or a child, a plant or a tree, the sky itself, the sun, all of the stars are there. This is the localization of all of them. Count the uplink first. Um,
So just some extra bits to ask. So what about this? Because these two together unlock a whole other set of dimensions. This does a lot, but this and the relationship and the kind of master emissary relationship of dominant hand and less dominant hand in most of us. Some people are ambidextrous, but
yeah,
those two
absolutely brilliant.
poles, that's a whole other thing. That's one thing, just to see what you think about that. But a second one, while I'm thinking of it, is these senses from the first wrist, or this extra dimension beyond the first wrist, does that include the living earth, which is the context for this body as well? Because and are there senses in that realm that we can access? Like, can we feel through other beings, plants, trees, the air, distances, other sides of the world? That's a question that comes up.
I want to go with the second one first, but I'll come back to the first one. So there's a second toy that I call the Dandelion, and it goes well with the hand toy. I'm going to just make the very simplest explanation of it or presentation of it. I have an extended essay on this on my Medium channel. So if you go to Medium, just look up Darren Stevenson Dandelion on the internet, you'll find it. And it's quite extensive. But effectively, it's a picture where all of reality, and this includes, so imagine that the sphere goes from like the beginning of what we could think of as this universe, if it had a beginning, to the end. And the end isn't, it's death. What's happening is it's getting bigger each time it collapses and expands. So it collapses to unity, like a speck of transcendent, impossible intelligence, and then it expands back into the appearance of distinction. Many, impossible numbers of time, more times per instant each time it does this, right? And so the appearance of solidity is an illusion. Most of the time, this is not here. A
Mm.
tiny part of the time, like a strobe light that keeps going faster until it just looks like it's on. This is what separate physical existence. It's um it's the persistence of vision that would happen if the collapse was super fast. So it appears totally solid, continuous, and real. Most of the time, it's not here. Most of the time, it's just unity. So yes, what the wrist does is it connects you to this dandelion and to all of the phases of it, so that in fact, the plants and animals and insects and living places and the sky and all of those features of existence, those are you. You are a unique point of presence of all of those. So upscaled from the wrist, all of those senses are ours. They're not mine, they are ours. They are the communal gift. And this is love. This is what love is, the anamnoetic, right? The unforgetting of. And so, yes, those beings are yours. Our ancestors, they sensed with the insects in the garden, they're like, oh, here comes the possum's going to eat the, I got to go out there. He's going to eat all the, all my carrots or whatever, right? Because the whole garden is right next door across the second wrist. And the garden is me. And I'm the possum too. Right? I don't need the garden to tell me the possum's coming. The possum tells me the possum is coming. Right. So yes, absolutely. But not just the animals and living places, the sky. The sky. This is why the here's the thing, like, oh yeah, the ancients, they were doing astronomy. We're doing astronomy, you idiot. That was their mind. They knew that I am the, and people are like, astrology, yeah, it's not scientific. There's no evidence. We've done the research and there's no p-value there, right? Well, they're right, but they're wrong in like 7 ways at the same time, because even if astrology quote isn't true, it gives you a way of thinking about metaphor and time and relationship. Without this toy, you'd be incapable of having certain kinds of thoughts. So it's not really a matter, we can get really deceived by illusions and woo and stuff like that. That's a problem. That's a real problem. On the other hand, the metaphors, if we are intelligent about how we play with them together, radically expand the possibilities of our minds and what we are capable of conceiving of and thus perceiving. So truth, while we need to be concerned about it, there are at least 3 kinds, right? There's sort of like a bullshit kind where this is woo. These people are just, they're in a cult, right? And there's the sort of factual kind that empiricism and science is concerned with, very important, but narrow scope of applicability. And then there's truth as the beauty and communal re-remembering of the nature of our origin. That kind of truth is really profound and does not depend on factual descriptions of phenomena and evaluations of their features, characteristics, how to measure them. It depends on something far more primordial, which is the senses of this wrist and what I would call the third mind, which is something you and I right now are actually playing. We're doing the thing I'm talking about, right? We're going up above the personal to play in this field that's right on the verge of that second wrist, right? Okay, now this thing.
No, wait, one thing first.
Yeah, please.
So just to access that in a different way, when you were talking about the wrist first, you got quite emotional, and I'd like to know what that is.
On our world, this feature is broken, and it's terrible. The dreams of all of the beings, of the mothers and the fathers and the children and the animals, They're just being ground up by a machine. It's lost here. Right in our time, it's lost here. That thing, that feature is sacred and true. You can trust it infinitely. It's incapable of lying. It doesn't do accounting games. It's not a courtroom intelligence. It's not about war. The things that have plagued my heart as a human are all the loss of this sense, these senses. The hopes of every being that ever lived for a beautiful world. There's no reason why it can't be here except this feature is broken here. And it's broken in the humans. It's in the humans that it's broken. You can see features of damage of it that extend out from our species into the cognitium of our world, so that the humans will see, like, they'll see chimpanzees go on the rampage, right, and just decimate some other troop, kill all the men, eat the babies, tear them apart, and they'll think, oh yeah, nature's violent. What they will never think is that the chimpanzees would not be doing that if the humans weren't doing it. They would never see the behavior of the chimpanzees as the inheritance of what the humans are doing. They will think, oh no, the chimps were always like that. Could be true, but what if it isn't? Because this idea of the cognitium, the network of the relational intelligence of all beings, and within that, the raccoon cognitium, the streptococcal cognitium, right? The psilocybin cognitium, the mountain cognitium. But the human cognitium is so powerful here that it transmits effects into nature. And then humans look back on those effects and they think, like, oh, nature's red in tooth and claw. No, you guys are broken. You're transmitting that damage into the other beings. And they're reflecting that damage back to you as you observe them, right? It's a very useful way to imagine. I'm not claiming it's true. We should understand that the cognitia are intimately connected. And if one of the organs goes totally fucking haywire, and the organ of our species has done this, then the other organs can inherit and reflect that damage. But yeah, man, it's the dream of every being that ever lived for a safe world, a haven for their children, and for the justice of the suffering of their ancestors, right? Imagine that humans think, oh, you can't fix the past. It's already happened, right? They're dead wrong about that. If our species were to do something so incredibly beautiful and alive and intelligent and human that it transformed everything, we would justify the horrors of history in that moment. Everybody would breathe. All of our dead ancestors would, like, stand up and cheer and be like, oh, wow, it was worth it, right? And similarly, if we push the button and collapse the whole story to death, they're going to be crying. Yeah, from the Buddhist perspective, hey, everything's fine. It's all going to work out. Stop worrying. Sure, sure, I get it. That's not an unimportant perspective. I don't want to trivialize it. But let's not ignore the embodied, enacted, beautiful perspective of our hearts for a moment. So that's why I was crying, because there is a ancestral library of agonies that are unnecessary. They are egregious. And we inherit some of that on when we are incarnated. And look, if you talk to our children, they're going to tell you straight up, right? What are you guys doing? This is stupid. You're killing each other. You're making billions of dead objects. Like, what even are you thinking? For the children, it's totally incomprehensible. They can't make the distinction between the human species and the individual humans like we are doing here as easily as we can in a sophisticated way. So for them, they're just carrying the agony of that, right? They've seen war, they've seen a million guns in films, they've seen killing and rape and terror and just horror. And they have no idea what could possibly be causing that. So they inherit the urgent ache for what we could think of as justice, not as vengeance or punishment or accounting games, as rebalancing, as becoming true together again. That's why I was crying. Our species, our children are carrying this impossible fucking burden.
So that part of you that feels that grief, that part of you's not broken though, is it? Because that can feel it. So that part is in touch with it. And I would say that every baby born has a complete connection to it. And it's only learned. The break is learned.
Mhm.
And it seems to be so resilient. I mean, maybe it's intimately connected to the very force of life itself, because in my own experience, this the same thing you're describing, which I've felt in my life. It doesn't matter how much I'm broken by life or my culture or the world or what's going on. This thing is still there that feels that. It doesn't die. It doesn't stop feeling. Even if my behaviors are doing things to try and stop it, the feeling, the pain of it, it just keeps feeling. And so I feel like this brokenness is a surface thing, and that actually it's unbreakable. This thing that we carry, this connection, is actually unbreakable. It's only on that behavioral surface level. And so, even though that's the most visible and causes all this trouble, I feel like it's so superficial that actually it could very quickly and easily be altered and repaired.
Everything you say is true. Um, there is a layer in which the injustices are always temporary and are always resolved. But that's not where we live. And there's another thing that was making me cry, I now realize, which is it's master and emissary E, right? It's master emissary-ish, which is that the vast part of the origin of my mind and intelligence, perhaps 90% of it, it's not verbal. And the part that's verbal, when it serves this, things go well. I like to think that's what's going on here. um, but this part has a great pain of not being seen in the world, in human behavior, and not having its. So this is one of the fingertips of this. And it's a very strange fingertip. Even in my own awareness, um, in my own cognition, in my own being, a lot of the time I am defecting from this into this because it's safe. I know how this works. It goes right back to what we were talking about earlier about roles. When I'm in my intellect, I have a UFO, right? I have my own UFO. I can go anywhere. I can do anything. But this thing feels threatened. The world hates it. The world wants to kill that thing. It destroys it in our children, in our lovers, in our parents, in our ancestors, in the living places. It would go after the sky if it could get a finger on it, right? Like that sun thing, get rid of that. You know, it's infinite when it's distended, when it's broken in this way. Uh, it will it will it will go after the foundations. It would literally try to tear heaven apart. It will go after the children. When we see this in Gaza, right, right now, and other places, but particularly in Gaza, and parts of Africa, other places, it just goes after the mothers straight up. Just kill them, rip that stuff apart, bury it in the ground. And that's part of why I was crying, is because even local to me in my own moment to moment experience, I defect too. Maybe a little less virulently and violently, but I defect into intellect, and
Mm.
that's my game, which I've noticed. The dreaming aspect of us is highly associated with this. It doesn't care about language. It doesn't care about grasping. It doesn't do courtrooms. It doesn't do accounting. And to be clear, even in dreaming, there are features of the waking aspect whose fingerprints arise in the dream, so that there's a little bit of those features in there for sometimes. Right? But yeah, it's the I've often thought of the Bible a highly weaponized and confusing document, to be clear. But it's the story of in Genesis, right? Cain kills Abel, and it's the attempt over time. There's this sort of heartbeat where Abel starts to reappear, and then reappears a little more, and then dies, and then reappears a little more, and then dies, and then again, then it fully reappears, and the humans just execute it. Right? And this is another part of the crying, right? Why does it keep killing us? Why does it
Mm.
kill the heart of the children and the mothers and the fathers? Not that I use the mothers and the children because they tend to be more connected, whereas the males tend to be a bit more um, troubleshooty, right, fixy. But we males also have all of these features, and we have the agony of having them submerged, forcefully pushed, and scripted away as well. So when I use that trope, I'm just focusing on something that we were scripted to understand, the sensitivity and intimacy of the mothers and the children. Of course, we come from mothers.
Yeah. I see. I feel like we're most vulnerable when we're mostly in our heads as well, and
Mhm.
most disconnected as well. And I've been noticing, certainly personally, it's been a journey I've been on of being more in touch with my heart, more in touch with my body, trying to balance out all these centers. And I feel like that's the route, that's the kind of way out of what's going on for me,
Mhm.
is to bring back in to awareness, or to sort of to give more attention to these other intelligences and the ones around me. Um, and I just, as you were talking, I wondered about dreaming, because in dreaming it seems like the intelligences are in their perfect balance. Because for me, dreaming is more emotional and more tangible, physical than it is mental.
Mhm.
It's a very small part. And there's a whole other mystical, mythic soul dimension, which suggests that that's the other higher intelligence is involved in it as well, in its balanced way,
Mhm.
somehow gives form to it. What do you think about that?
Well, you can see me smiling, right? So a moment ago I was crying, and now I'm very happy because of what you're saying here, right? My dream mind is like, they're over there talking about me. Wow, what are they? They're saying nice things. Oh, they see me. I'm seen, right? Um, Yeah, absolutely. I think dreaming is naturally precognitive. However, I think we have the whole idea backwards, right? Like all of the things that we think of as supernatural or mystical, those are actually the foundation of what's going on. There's a tiny little island floating on top of them. It's not like that. And from this island, we say like, oh, that's telepathy, or oh, that's, bilocation or whatever, oh, that's channeling, or oh, that's mediumship, right? When actually most of the thing is that, and this tiny little island is remarking on the ocean as if it's exotic. Right? Um, so the dreaming intelligences are relational, but there's something very important that humans overlook about dreaming, especially when they do like dream analysis and stuff like this. And I've been fascinated by this for many years. I'm not claiming to be an expert, like my idea is the best one or anything like that. But there are features that are really important to understand, which is the dreaming mind does not understand why it comes to an end. It's very curious about that. There's an apocalypse at the end of the sleep cycle for the dreaming mind, and the world literally dies. And it doesn't have what we have over here, which is the continuity of memory of self over intervals, right? It doesn't have that. So each time we dream, the world is born. It persists for a time. There's a sort of orchestral flow of various intelligences, and then it collapses and dies. And the dreaming aspect is very curious about why this has to happen, because it doesn't have to happen. And also, what's on the other side of that? And also, who is the one that brings the apocalypse? Because there is one that brings the apocalypse. There's a feature of cognition that knows, it senses the cycle. It's very important. We wouldn't want to get rid of it, but we might want it to work differently. And it essentially just pulls the kill switch on the dream. And so people don't, they're not aware of these things, so they don't track the features of the dream showing its concerns in the relationships and symbols and situations that occur over the nightly span of dreaming and change. In the beginning, they are certain, they are particular ways. In the midpoint, there are other ways. In the down arc, there are other ways. And near the end, they are very other ways. They're obviously the dream is expressing its concern about the coming of the apocalypse and also its curiosity about what's on the other side. And so without understanding those things, we're going to misinterpret dreams radically, right? We need to understand that arc, much like we were talking about the arc of the sun and the arc of the world within it, right? There's a lifespan to the dreaming's intelligences. It gets born it lives for a time and it dies each time we go to sleep and wake up. So we should attend those matters with interest and curiosity. The dreaming mind has much to teach us about the nature of all kinds of things.
Well, isn't it also a rehearsal for life? It's birth and death every time you do it. And is birth and death similar to the dream? Is there a another consciousness or level of awareness outside of life that we're having? So you've got dream, and then you've got waking life, and then you've got whatever's on the outside of birth and death. What about that place? What do you think about that place?
I've had some very unexpected insights about this recently. And they have a lot to do with me meeting this young woman who's named Amber, who last November was paralyzed from the chest down in a car accident. Somehow our meeting, she doesn't, I have her permission to speak of her, just to be clear. Um, Somehow in our meeting, it was like I was receiving transmissions. It wasn't necessarily what she was saying. It was more like what she was carrying. And perhaps in my old age, I become a bit clairsentient, right? I can sense unspoken charges in the psyche and the spirit of other people. So yeah, okay. So this is the other thing. We have the primacy of dreaming and waking backwards. Dreaming is primal. Waking, kind of, weird. I mean, important, not to be dismissed, but the dreaming mind has primacy. Without it, we wouldn't have waking minds. We wouldn't have bodies. I mean, it's fundamental to existing. And I've often heard people say it's practice for death. Well, that's interesting. But what if we have birth and death backwards? What if death is actually life and this is actually death, right? Because over there, things are pretty good, right? You're okay. You got nothing. You're not under threat. You don't have to try to survive. You're not vulnerable. I mean, potentially, right? We could imagine this. We don't know. But you get born, you're going to have some trouble now. You can be damn sure you're going to have like fall into pain and, could need commodities. You got to eat food and breathe air and all this stuff, right? So it might be useful to imagine whether or not we don't have to decide what birth and death are, but it's useful to imagine it as if we have it backwards. Certain tribes of the ancient Greeks were very clear that this thing we're experiencing, this is a crypt. This is literally the grave of our soul. Our soul has died into this, right?
So this is the underworld.
Yes, this is where we live is the underworld. Yeah. And so in that sense, this is death and that is life. And what if all of our intelligences and our affinities and our disaffinities, what we are, what we are, what we are philic toward, and what we are repulsed by, and we naturally just avoid. What if many of those things, if not all, no, probably not all of them, because that's a complex set of senses. But what if many of those things are actually our death leaking backwards into our life, right? And saying, no, no, don't do that. Right? That's going to be a big problem later, right? So we think that our waking thoughts are really good at evaluating stuff. They're not. What is good at evaluating stuff is a position above them from which they derive. And this is something we can forge together instantly with nothing more than the agreement to do so as you and I made today, right? We can forge this third mind and get outside. I can get outside of Darren, go upscale. I'm literally playing with the uplink in order to speak of it, right? You can't speak of it without, I'm not reading from a book, right? So when it woke up, that's part of why I started to tear up because I was like, oh my God, it's waking up. I don't usually, what am I going to do? And my thinking mind gets really concerned. It's like, I'm not going to be able to talk right. I can't, I'm going to talk like a baby, you know, all of these things. So yeah, it's useful to imagine that we have this backwards. I think it's important to be capable of entertaining that perspective together and perhaps sustaining it for a time when we can become curious and inquire into these matters.
Yeah, well, this is the dream part of the death thing is actually the waking part, and this is the dream part where, for me, dreaming has always seemed like it's my body, mind, soul repairing itself whilst the body and the head is sleeping. So I wonder if this life journey we're on is the kind of working shit out, repairing things and getting it all back in line so we can then live again when we reach that personal apocalypse. And interestingly, and I don't know where this fits in, but a few times in my life I've passed out, and when I've passed out, I've gone to a place that's more real than here. So that this sense I have of being conscious now seems like a very dim imitation to this place I go to when I've passed out, which is so real and feels so much more real. And yet the content of the experiences there are very vague when I come back to this level. But it's happened a few times, and every time I've come back, I've just had this overwhelming sense of that's more real than this is. Now, I don't know where that place is. I don't know if that's a leakage from beyond death. Who knows? But it's so strong, the sensation of it being more real than this, that that's always puzzled me or fascinated me. Like, where is that? And where is that in relation to this? So yeah, just wanted to say that too.
If you talk to people about this topic and you ask them questions that open their heart, many of them, children and adults, will say something that clearly indicates that they have a longing for a place, to return to a place that they don't know where it is, but they call it home. I wrote an essay called The Guardian Angel. In fact, it was the first essay I ever wrote, um, in which I pose a fictional situation in which my parents were trying to teach me the word home. And they would point to our house and they would say home. And I would shake my head and I would point to the sky and say home. I go, no, 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 home. I'm like, no, no, home. Right. So yeah, we have this compass in our hearts, right? Like a magnetic feature that knows we come from beyond. And not just we came from beyond. No, 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 no. Moment to moment, we are arriving from beyond. And if that were to suddenly reverse and you passed out, you might begin to recompose first the uplink and then maybe the vision of sort of the portal of that place, which probably isn't even a place, right? It's a relationship, right? It's the ship of all relations or something like this. It's a way of travel together in being, or at least it can be useful again to entertain that perspective. So yeah, those are some of my thoughts and brilliant questions. I love it.
Yeah, for me, it's good to feel you, because I know the UFO can do amazing things, but I'm much more drawn in when the feelings are mixed in with it. Then
Yeah,
the
you are vastly more in contact with your soma and your heart than I usually am. But I modulate depending on who we're hanging,
oh, yeah, yeah,
when we're forming the third together, then I modulate. But yeah, I'm like a race car driver. You're much more like a gardener.
yeah, yeah. It's interesting, the whole idea of communicating more from the heart using these kind of mediums, which are primarily, invented for language. And well, I mean, it's visual, so there's the body language. The unspoken is very present in these things, which is always good. Yeah,
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 the
yeah, yeah,
face, right? People are like, you got five senses, and like, really, what about your face? What
yeah,
about balance? Can you tell where you are right now? Are you hungry? I mean, I was able to name 27 without working very hard when I actually sat down and thought about it. But yeah, the face, right? It's people like to cite science, and I don't always do that because I'm skeptical. People also like to steal authority for science from science for woo-ish presentations that I don't like that. But studies have shown that more than 80% of human communication happens before the words are spoken, like when people are together. Yeah. So, you know, once again, it's this thing again, right? We're stumbling around. We're trying to walk on the tip of our pinky in relation and consciousness, And that's a tragedy. We need to remember together and remind each other and recognize and recommune around this so that we can relax that tension back into the field, right? Because the field is very intelligent, and the highly tense spot is a response to crisis. It's symptomatic of isolation and having to carry the entire vigilance and prediction burden yourself, which is
Mm.
completely unnatural even to predators, right? Predators use the environment to sense with. So they might seem like they're lone wolves or whatever, the jaguar or the rattlesnake or something. Rattlesnake goes back to a hibernaculum with a bunch of other snakes, right? It gives birth to live young. It cares for them when they're babies, you know. So that myth of like it's all about the individual, yeah, that's death.
Mm.
That's pain. That's suffering. That's being deprived of the anamnoetic and also amniotic womb of intercommunal being and origin into being moment to moment, not just at birth. Like right now, your heartbeat following this. Yeah. Very important for the humans to forge little unities where this is reenacted and remembered. And one of the things I was thinking about earlier, it's a trivial note, but when we see the profoundly performative brilliance of some celebrity, right? In our modernity, this is often something that inspires envy. We relate with their excellence, and but we also think like, I want to do that. Why are they doing that, right? I should be doing that. And that envy is something that in most of our probably evolutionary history was impossible because we would do the beautiful thing together. Yes, there was someone dancing in the center of the group, but we were all dancing, right? And of course, when we get together to dance, that's pretty good, right? Now the performer is just the one making the, you know, the context, and then we all start bubbling. Yeah. And in a sense, comedy is a bit like that too. I think it's hilarious to just watch humans losing their composure and having their because what the comedian does is he sets up a series of sort of accounting expectations like the left hemisphere does, and then just pulls the rug out from under them. And everyone loves that moment of the rug being pulled out. They just go nuts, right? But they go nuts as a group, right? It just starts bubbling everywhere.
Yeah,
But
these
that's
forces, you see, I feel like these forces are kind of, they arise spontaneously in response to what's going on. And I don't think it's particularly human-led, like on the individual level. I mean, you're talking about um, taking steps or being an agent to kind of make these things happen. But I've been feeling a lot like it's coming from up, from underneath, from outside, and it's animating people more. I am feeling like there's more heart intelligence coming out, spilling out in people. I feel like I'm seeing people being broken by all of this, and not just broken and then ruined by it, but broken open so that things that have been pushed back and held back start to spill out, and positive things like heart intelligence. And I don't know, I mean, the physical, I mean, I see trends now in, back towards body and health and all of that. So that maybe is an indicator that it's happening on the kind of physical body level as well. Um, there does seem to be a cultural pushback against this extreme mind period that we've been through, or in particular in the West, in the sort of Christian scientific era. Um, Interesting how Christianity seemed to sort of give birth to science. Like Christianity was a very heady religion towards the end. I mean, I think as we now are discovering. Maybe its origins were much more well balanced and more interesting, but it went off on this sort of, you know, out of the body, out of the. I mean, it's always claimed to have heart there, and perhaps, you know, has still kept a lot of that, but it really seemed to push us into the head, um, more lately anyway, and then it seemed to turn into science.
This is the evolutionary development of the capture of the wrist, right? The capture of our communality
Like a
and
handcuff.
severed. Yeah. You sever the hand and you put an artificial thing here, right? Like a bracelet. Right? And weirdly, religion, it literally means it's based on the word for ligament, right? To connect, to tie back together. So it's hilariously ironic what happens over time. Um,
It's like a reworking of the connection. Instead of you just having the connection, it's been reworked.
yeah,
It,
yeah, we're
in
gonna mediate.
in some,
We'll
we're going
improve
to
this.
make it better.
Yeah, we'll improve this for you. Hand this over to us. We'll take care of you, right? You give us all your property and your money when you die, we'll indoctrinate your children but
Mm.
these tragedies, like I have a sort of array of myths about how this came to be because I've inquired very deeply into these matters and I'm fascinatedly curious about them. I don't necessarily believe my myths are right or good, but they're often useful. And one of them is that there was a series of accidents over the developmental arc of our species where features of local situations, perhaps between the Earth and the Sun and the Moon, or even the time space, like the Sun is drawing the planets through time space. So they're like spinning these spirals around. It's basically like a spiraling tube of the planets and the Sun drawing them through time space. And the humans just think like, the time space, it's all the same thing, just a bunch of empty space. Nothing like that is even vaguely possible. So time space has character, and the sun is mediating features of time space so that it's possible to have planets locally here. It's sort of organizing these features like a guy might, although you could think of the sun as feminine too. You don't have to be, but yeah, it's organizing, it's doing this in structuring that keeps things safe for this planet, which is really more like an organelle in a cell than it is like a separate thing. It's like an organelle in the solar family, and this is the one that's brimming with, organismal life. There might be life on some of the others. There could be layers in which those other planets are alive and this one is dead, at the same time, right? But my point is just there was a cascade of accidents that damaged the uplink between our species and origin, right? And then we had to develop religions to try to reactivate it. Let's do this one thing together. We'll reactivate the uplink, and then everybody will be healed, and that's totally great. But the moment that you had that going on, once you had to actually really pay attention and do things very carefully, um, then you had people who could reestablish the uplink almost by themselves too, right? Prophets and oracles and stuff. Then you at the same time had mimics, right? You had people who they just stole the mechanical garb of the thing and just started, stealing from them. So this has been a long problem, and most of the religions got captured and weaponized by those processes over time. So they became about terrifying you, right?
Mm.
Just frightening you and thus conscripting you through fear and promises of eternal life and so forth, which I mean, there isn't once again, this is totally backwards. Ladies and gentlemen, there's no such thing as death. So you don't have to worry about eternal life. That whole death thing, not a thing. The body, yeah, that's going to pass away. It's impossible for what you are to disappear. There's no death. That's not a thing. So you don't have to worry about, is there some kind of like, there are many stories that when we die, we have to undergo this process where we face our karmic uh, behavior in life. And
We
then
get the bill.
say again.
We get the bill.
Yeah, yeah, right. I thought you said we find ourselves in a pickle. I'm like, yeah, we did. Yeah, we're in a pickle. But yeah, we get the bill. And one of the things that I think about death is that it's probably as unique for each of us as birth was. Like we all think like birth's the same thing. No, it isn't. Not even kind of. I mean, yeah, categorically it's the same thing, but each human experiences incarnation uniquely, as well as belonging to the category. So why would we think death is any different? Oh, here's what happens after death. Really? Well, here's what happens after birth. Are you sure?
Yeah.
Like we have this sort of one valued thinking about transcendental features of being, and that is certainly confused as hell. That's a left hemisphere thing. Oh, I know what that is. I can manipulate it with with the word. Ah, once I got a word for it, it's mine. I can just, do. No, so we should be thinking in multiple complex ways at once about anything that's important to us if we're going to be thinking about it, right? Instead of being in it, which is, of course, usually preferable because then the spirit of intimacy and improvisation overcomes the safety of the role that is familiar. Now we have a chance to experiment with our humanity, which is, I think, probably one of the primary features of the possibility space of incarnation. I'm
Do you
very
think,
proud of myself for having said that.
well done. Is do you think thinking is how can I phrase this right? So is thinking the like contingency that we came up with because we were no longer in the moment? Because in the actual moment, all the information you need is present. So thinking is what you do when you're not in the moment because you're desperately trying to put it all together and hold on to it and make sense of it. Whereas when you're in the moment, it's all there. You don't need to carry it.
Yeah. Beautiful. Yeah, it's not just in the moment, it's present in loving memory and relation, right? Which I guess you could say is in the moment, but I just want to highlight the relation, present in the relational space, playfully, creatively, curiously rescuing each other from thinking.
Yeah, it's not, you're not this one point thinking. It is relational. When I say moment, I'm imagining it's a womb of
Yeah,
everything
yeah.
that I'm completely one with. That's what it is. So there's no need for those things. And it feels like the further we're away from that presence, the more the need to construct all these other hopeless kind of contingencies that just don't cut it.
Yeah, I recently have been starting to say, thinking is not what minds are for. That's a symptom of isolation, right? That's not what your mind is for. What your mind is for is the fertilization and catalyzation of communion. That's what minds are for. And when that's been like evacuated from our common experience, then you start dun 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 and bum bum and bam and bam 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 right right. And now you're gonna be doing. Now you're gonna become like a factory of manipulating the features of the absences that are the the empty space of what was evacuating. You're gonna start manipulating that as things, right? Um, in consciousness. So thinking isn't what minds are for. There's a little tiny slice of experience for which that's useful, but when it swallows the whole damn arc, you're in agony, dude. That's going to be miserably horrifying and isolate. It'll isolate even further, and it'll sustain all of the evacuations. It'll start sustaining them because it arises as a satellite feature over the evacuations, and once it has that job, it just wants that job to continue. It associates the loss of this job with death, So it's just like evict anything that brings presence back in, right? Just get rid of that stuff. Replace that with manipulable commodities. And you can see this throughout the arc of the development of what we call civilization. What the hell is civilized about that? That's insane. We need a better word for that. I don't know, is omnicide? Just kill everything? You know?
Yeah,
That's not civilization. Let's be really clear. So
yeah.
yeah, the thinking thing, mostly a symptom of the evacuation of the relational intimacy of our moment to moment being together.
Maybe it was originally just a little warning feature to show you that you're slightly pulling away from it, and it just popped in, yeah, and said, and then, oh yeah, shit, and then you got back into it. But then we went too far one day, you know, and
By the
then
way,
it's
that
bouncing around inside. We lost the contact,
right.
so it just all bounced like this instead of, yeah,
Yeah, it's funny because even in Zen practice, this is a well-known thing. Like your mind's going to start thinking again. Don't worry about that. Just come back to move, or your breath, follow your breath in awareness. Just come back. So you'll start to depart. That'll be like a little bell. Come back to the body. Come back to the heart. Come back to intimacy.
yeah, yeah. Hmm. Well, that's my words done, I think. I'm just feeling now.
It's funny because throughout the interview, in order to give you my eyes, I have to look at a dead camera. It's just the weirdest irony, right? To give you my gaze, I have to look at that object up on top of the screen. So I can't look, if I look at you, you can see like this is me looking at your image, right?
Yeah, I never bother with looking at the camera because I'm looking at you when I'm talking. So
Yeah, that's good.
I feel like when I'm looking at you, I can feel you anyway.
Ah,
So, you know what I mean? So I do feel like that's where the connection is. The sort of eye contact thing just is not relevant in this context.
yeah, I think um for me, I imagine viewers, right? This is me doing the little satellite thing, right? Like, what are other people going to see? What do they think? So I look at the camera to give the viewers my eyes as well as you. We will eventually have technology that we can actually do something like eye contact in this
Yeah,
context.
yeah.
But
And it would
I
be,
understand what you're saying, right? Like you just see me and you feel connected. It's the same when I look at you. Um,
yeah. And that's interesting that because there is a connection. I know this is remote and there's a whole load of sensory information missing, but I do feel like it's quite incredible how much connection this does allow, and it's not just visual. So, when I'm really grateful, actually, I just want to say thank you for sharing the feelings before, because that is really important for me now in any communication, is to have that sense. I could really feel what you were feeling in that moment you were sharing it. And I think that's probably quite valuable for anybody watching as well. Just bringing in those other layers. Yeah.
yeah, I'm grateful too because I usually I ride in the UFO. It's familiar. I know how that spaceship works. Like, it's ironic. There's so many things I can see in a very sophisticated way, but that does not mean I can do them. And that part is painful. Uh it feels like an ancestral pool of pain. And maybe that's not real. Maybe it's just Darren's pain, but I kind of don't think so. I'm willing to think of it that way, though. I'm willing to think of that what if that's just actually Darren? What if that's you, buddy? Um, because certain
Probably both, huh?
both things are true, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm so grateful for you creating the space and the invitation, making the invitation for us to come together today, uh, and explore together and remember together and heal together.
Yeah. And I'd like to start having conversations that are more creative with people, where we're, because all conversation is creative when it's carried out in a way, in this kind of way for me. But I feel like this is a really powerful resource for generating, maybe non kind of rational objects that can go out there and do things. I just feel like it's important to conjure this energy between people at this time, when it's people showing up in good faith and, sincerely wanting to connect and explore. I just feel like it's such a valuable resource right now.
Oh, yeah.
So I want to do more of that. Um, Anyone who wants to do that, give me a shout.
Yeah, yeah, me too. Let's do more of that.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
This may seem trivial, but I'm very curious. There's an image in the background on the chimney, and if I'm not asking too much, could I see it? Because I've just been curious about it this whole time. Can you say some things about this image?
All I can say about it is that I got this off my grandmother, my mother's mother. She got it, either they lived, her and my grandpa lived in the Middle East after the Second World War. He used to work, he was an engineer and he worked for BP. And they lived in Tehran, they lived in Baghdad, so they spent time out there, probably living the colonial life, no doubt. But they were sort of touched by the culture as well, and this was just something that she picked up somewhere.
Mm.
And I, yeah, I don't know what the story is. It's probably quite a well-known excerpt from a story that, people from that part of the world will know about. But I've just always liked it as an image.
It has a fundamental feature that's familiar to me, which is that the woman is red and the man is blue.
Okay.
Ironically, if you look at my clothing, which wasn't intentional, it's like red, blue, red, blue, red, blue, in blue. But but yeah, this red and blue thing is fundamental. Every organism that has any relationship with light, it knows these two signals, red and blue. Mm. Tim, I'm so grateful. I had a blast today, and yeah, just much love and all blessings to you, my friend.
Yeah, lots of love to you. It was great. Let's do it again.
Yeah, wise dreams.
Okay. See you soon.
Bye for now.